Hello, thanks for coming, everyone. I want to congratulate you on another great quarter. It's our eighth straight quarter with a positive profit. And I just want to talk today about cutting a few costs because we have some projects coming up that our margin is not as large as we're used to, and we're going to have to significantly reduce some costs in order to turn that profit that we are so very used to now. So, three ways that we're actually going to work on cutting costs. We want to reduce the reworking of projects. We actually had a lot of reworks this quarter, and we'll talk about that on the next few slides. We actually want to reduce our outside hires as well, and then we also want to talk about some office supplies expense, ways to limit that and ways to reduce those. So the first one we want to talk about is reworking projects, and as you can see, we had 22% rework of parts on average, and that's just up from 18% last quarter, and that's something that we want to significantly reduce. Anytime we're spending extra time and extra resources into into a part, then we're cutting back into our margin, and that's never going to help us turn a profit. We also spent $300,000 in rework materials and 182 hours spent in reworking parts. That's a lot of man hours and a lot of money going back into parts that we didn't get right the first time. So to show this, I actually brought up the specific part E372, which actually we had an 82% rework on, and that was our high of percentage of reworks, and that's absolutely unacceptable. We can't do that. And just to show you why that's unacceptable, we only had about a $60,000 margin on this project, and because we had to rework 82%, we actually ended up over 100 grand in the red, just because we had to go back and redo the parts. So some ways we're planning on fixing that. We want to double check our spraying compounds. We know that going into spraying, we're not always checking those, and that leads to a lot of reworks. When you spray with the wrong tool, or you spraying with the wrong compound, it's going to mess things up. We also want to take the extra minute to do it right. The management has actually come up with a sheet that allows us to double check right before we spray to make sure that everything's in order and that we're not going to have an error just from being mindless or an accidental error. We also know that human errors happen, and we're not saying that everything has to be perfect, but we do want to reduce those errors. Also, if you have any suggestions to prevent reworks, or you're noticing that one part is reworking a lot, please let the managers know. We know that someone had to notice E372 being resprayed a lot, and that's something that we want to adjust maybe mid-quarter instead of getting to the end of the quarter and saying, oh, we definitely need to fix our process on that. So moving on to our outside hires, we're going to try and cut costs on outside hires because, as you can see, we paid $36,000 to outside hires in this last quarter. And only $16,000 of that went to our inspectors. And as you know, our inspectors are a very vital part of our business. We need them to have our certifications. But we don't need to be spending $20,000 more on outside hires. And we also noticed that $22,000 went to repeat outside hires. And that means that we're hiring people to do the same job over and over again. So I just want to show you really quickly the stats for the past few quarters and how our outside hires relate to our inspectors. And just to show you how quarter four stood out to us about how many outside hires we had that weren't inspectors. And as you can see, in quarter four, our inspectors didn't even take up half of our outside hires. So what we're going to do to kind of limit costs in the outside hires department is managers must now sign off on all outside hires. I know before it was verbal approval or, hey, I need this to be done, but now we're actually going to have a form that says, I approve this, this is going to go through. We also want to make sure that the outside hires are getting the job done correctly the first time. We noticed that sometimes outside hires were coming back to redo a job that they had already done, and that's something that we can't have. We can't spend extra money to do. We don't have that margin anymore, and that's really going to hurt us if we have people coming back to do the same job over and over again. And lastly, we want to make sure outside hires are filling out job cards so we know what they're doing, because sometimes we have people across departments that may be able to help other people out and limit those costs to the going to the outside hires and keep everything internal. Then our last way to reduce costs is we're going to work on some office supplies, just controlling them and working with reducing those expenses. As you can see, we spent $15,000 on office supplies this past quarter, which was 50% more than last quarter, and that doesn't account for our expansion branch that's just opening up in Kentucky. So just to show you our differences in the past quarters with office supplies, I have a graph, and as you can see, quarter four is definitely a lot higher, and we feel that this can be limited in a few ways. We want to first of all focus on reducing printing costs. We know that this past quarter we started to ask for confirmation slips after the projects were done. We're now going to save those as PDFs. We're also going to send electric documents when possible. IT is going to come through and do a demonstration of how to do this on the computers here very soon. We're also going to use community office supplies more carefully. We actually have had to buy a lot of staplers and a lot of 3-hole punches just in this past quarter, and while those things may seem insignificant, the costs really do add up. And if everyone can just treat the community tools as their own, we feel that they'll do a lot better. So this is just a little comic I have coming up here, and by no means is our company ready to do this, but I guess if we don't cut costs, we may have to be cutting our health insurance for that Apple a Day program. But in all reality, we want to limit our reworking of parts, we want to get our management approval of outside hires, and then think before you print. And if we follow those 3 things, we're going to be able to take our margins that are maybe smaller next quarter, but turn those into our 9th straight profit semester or quarter. Thank you very much.